All right, everybody, it's the Jere Metcalf podcast, where top real estate agents tell how they do it. And today, we do not have a real estate agent on the show. We have a really, I can't even tell you how excited I am. This is Damon Cart. He is one of the world's leaders in neuro-linguistic psychology. And we're bringing him today to talk about how powerful this is and can be in transforming your business. It was and has been in mine. And I am thrilled to have him. He is the only person in NLP to be mentored by Steve Andreas, who wrote the book Transforming Yourself, who was also mentored by Maslow, who created Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He was also given Fritz Perls, and then one of the fathers of hypnotherapy was also who he worked with, and that is who has mentored you. And throughout this conversation, Damon is going to share through my questions how he has transformed my life, how neuro-linguistic psychology, and this guy, everybody, and I'm going to let him say hi, but he is the one person out there, if anyone can take this form of psychology and give it to you in a way that you can apply it to your life and your business and transform and create the life that you want, it's him. So Damon, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. So just a slight correction there. So Steve Andreas mentored me. He also mentored some other people as well. My distinction, which is awesome, that I'm very fortunate and grateful to have, is that I'm the only person he ever endorsed to teach the self-concept model, which is the model that he created, and also, in my opinion, the most powerful model, not just in NLP, but any most powerful model for transformation. If you really want to make permanent changes to better your life and experience greater fulfillment, that is the model to do it. It's creates predictable results. It's very precise. And it's what I base all of my teaching and coaching on.
And you explain it really well. He's got a YouTube channel, everybody, if you want to check that out. It's unbelievable. I was just listening to it before the call. I've listened to you for a few years, and even today, I was listening to you, and I'm like, God, just like, yes, like this is just, you really nail it down. So let's start for everybody who's listening. NLP, explain for everybody what that is.
So it stands for neuro-linguistic programming. Neuro meaning the five senses. This is how we take in information. Linguistic, because not only does language shape the way that we think, it's reflexive in both directions. So how we code our experiences is through language. And when we code our experiences in language, it also affects how we experience that experience, especially as a memory. So language is sort of the code of how you think and how you experience things. So it's very, very important. It's very much connected to your information inputs, which is the five senses. Programming is that we create programs. And I guess the simplest way I can break that down is think of a habit. You have a habit, and that would be like a program. You don't have to go in and think your way through that all over again and make a choice about it. You just do it. And you're hardwired to do that because your brain is constantly trying to find ways to conserve energy. So if we can take a decision and make that decision and not have to make it over and over again, and we do this every day, like our routines and everything, then we can save that energy and put it on something else. So we're constantly creating these programs. You've been creating them since you were a kid. And this is basically to save time and energy. But oftentimes a program that was created in childhood isn't serving you very well in adulthood. And we have to, and this is very unconscious, by the way, most people don't realize it. It's like trying to explain what water is to a fish. A fish just doesn't know any different. It's just what it's swimming in, right? So we're kind of swimming in our programs and we don't realize that they exist. And so what NLP does is we learn how to elicit that information, that structure, to bring it into consciousness. When you're able to bring it into consciousness, now you can actually change it. You can do something different about it, or with it rather. And then once you change whatever programs you want to change to better yourself, better your life, then the idea is to let them slip back into unconsciousness, because then they become automatic, just like the previous program was before you changed it. And so now you're not having to constantly think about whether I have that cigarette or smoke that, or eat that thing that's not good for me. You're now on autopilot to avoid those things and go in directions of healthier habits and healthier ways of being.
Wow. So basically if we're getting the outcomes in life that we don't want, it's probably because of programming we're not even aware of. That if we could be aware of it, that's the key to turn to transform our life.
Exactly. So, for example, we're talking about business, we're talking about real estate. So, what if someone was failing in the real estate business? Well, then they might look at that and say, well, maybe it's the market, and maybe I need to move to a different market. And if you did that, if that was your belief and it was in fact correct, you move to a different market and you start doing better, you go, okay, well, that's what it was, and problem solved, right? And then you might say, well, I'm not doing very well because the economy is not doing very well. And so maybe you just hang in there for a little while, the economy gets better, and then sure enough, you start doing better. But what if you believe you're a failure? There's no escape. Doesn't matter where you go, doesn't matter how good the economy is, you will find a way to fail. Now, you might think, well, why would I do that? Why would I find a way to fail when that's not what I want? But if you believe you are that, it is more scary to you to detach from what you believe about yourself and do something out of character that then might make you question who you are, and you would feel lost and things would feel chaotic. We're more afraid of that than not living up to what we value. And so you will find a way to fail. But if we can transform that belief into I'm a success, then you will find ways to succeed no matter where you are. And every time you do succeed, it's going to boost your confidence. So you're going to go out and do more things. You're going to take a little more risk. You're not going to be deterred by failure because you know that failure is just temporary. It's just feedback. And so you will find a way to succeed. And so I would say the best way to describe what I do is that's what I really focus on is what are the beliefs you have about yourself and how well do they line up with your values? And most of the time, even I've coached like top CEOs in Silicon Valley, which is not far from where I live. And it is amazing to me how on paper they would be some of the most successful people you can imagine. And they're not happy, they're not fulfilled. And a lot of times they suffer from imposter syndrome because what they believe about themselves does not line up with what they value. And so it doesn't matter how much sort of external success they create. If they're not connecting with it inside, it's not going to feel good. And a lot of times they will find ways to sabotage that, which is, you can imagine you've spent all this time, all these years building up this success only to sabotage it because you're not connecting with it internally. And so I've come across that more than you would probably think with very, very successful people.
Wow. Well, I already know your content. We've not had much one-on-one time, so it's really good to have you here. A few things is a lot of people right now are probably thinking, oh, well, just affirmations will fix that.
Right. No, they won't. Yeah. I don't know anybody who has escaped affirmations. If you've gotten into personal development, they're the quickest, easiest go-to kind of thing. And I'm amazed at how prevalent it still is, but it just goes to show that there's just not a lot of deep exploration into some of these things. They're just sort of passed on. You read it in a book, and then another author comes along and just, includes it, or you see it in videos all the time. And affirmations weren't working for me. And I wanted to understand that better because I felt like, like the feeling of everybody's at the party and you're not, and you can't find the party or you didn't get invited to the party. That's what I felt about affirmations. It just wasn't helping me. I would temporarily feel kind of good after looking at myself in the mirror and telling myself what a great success I already was, even though inside of me, I didn't really believe it. And then nothing would change. So I started looking into this further. And then what I went on to study with NLP and started to understand what was happening. If I'm telling myself I am something that I do not really believe that I am, then that creates an internal conflict. And now I'm fighting against myself. So I keep saying I'm a millionaire and I'm not a millionaire. The sane part of you, your inner wisdom, has to step in and say, no, you're not, because you can't function in the world like a millionaire if you're only making $20,000 or $30,000 a year. You can't do that. And so there's this conflict that comes about. And so most of the time with affirmations, I would say at best, they do nothing. But oftentimes they actually create more problems than you're attempting to solve. And so if you don't really believe it, and you keep saying it, you're not going to suddenly start believing it. I mean, I guess it's possible, but it's super, super rare. It is how you're coding your experiences, and especially your experiences about who you are, that are related to who you are, that generate those beliefs about who you are. Without understanding how that's happening, you can't change it. And most people don't understand how that's happening. And so the model that Steve Andreas created, that is specifically for changing those beliefs.
So to repeat what you said, for anyone who's been in a call with me, we talk about this a little bit, and I talk about you a lot, but we have values, because you just to repeat what you said, values and what we believe about ourselves. So we all have values that drive our decisions. And then we all have things that we believe about ourselves. And what our values are and what we believe about ourselves, those are not always in line. I value generosity, but I believe I'm greedy.
Yeah.
And so if those things aren't lining up, the outcome of that, your feeling about yourself, your self-esteem, as Steve Andreas said, you had an interview with him, your self-esteem is what is an outcome of that. Yes. And so when we look at affirmations, you were saying about, I did affirmations, they didn't work. Well, I'm saying something that I actually don't, it's not changing my belief, because it doesn't change what I believe. It doesn't change the processes and the NLP of what I'm thinking about myself. So now I actually feel worse because I've got this inner conflict arguing with myself, because the minute I have an experience in life where that compulsion to be greedy and do what I don't like about myself comes up, and it's still there, now I feel worse.
Not only that, even anytime you act in a way that is generous, your mind will push that out. And if somebody even brings it up to you, like, what you just were very nice and generous to that person, you'll say, well, that didn't count because whatever. You'll make up some reason to discount it, and because it doesn't fall within your beliefs about who you are. And yeah, what you're saying is when you believe you are something different than what you value, that will bring your self-esteem down and your confidence. And this is like the big mysterious thing. There's so many books written on self-esteem, but Steve was the only one that I know of, and the first one to nail it. Where does self-esteem come from? It's when your behavior aligns with your values. That's where self-esteem comes from. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself. So if I value happiness and I do things that make me happy, my self-esteem is going to be high. If I value success and I believe I'm a successful person, my self-esteem is going to be high. And that's the other thing too, is maybe you don't believe it, you value it, but you don't believe you are. So if I value success and I don't believe I'm successful, when I do something successful, I'll get a little boost, I'll feel it, but it'll go away really, really fast because I don't believe it. So the self-esteem is not sustainable. The self-esteem is not grounded. It will come and go, just like more like a state. And most of what NLP started with was helping people get into resourceful states. You said you like Tony Robbins. He talks about states all the time. I liked that, but I thought there's got to be something even deeper. Because what is my normal way of being? That's based on my beliefs. And if that's sort of coming and going, and I used to suffer from moodiness a lot. If that's sort of coming and going, that's not very stable. I'm looking for something more stable. States are not really stable. They come and go. So what's really stable is your beliefs. So if you believe you are a success, and that is based on actual experiences that you've had, your self-esteem is very stable and sustainable, and it stays elevated, and it's not jumping up and down like this. And so that's really important.
Right. You talk about, this actually goes into the Schwartz method a little bit, because you talk about how when the state of mind that you're in, there's the state of mind you really have, which really comes down to what do I value and what do I believe about myself, and whether those are in line or not, period. Mm-hmm. And then there's the other thing that says, well, I can go make myself feel better because I can say something, I can go to a party, I can even do drugs, and that's going to make me feel better. But once I'm done with that altered state, I'm going to shift right back to where I believe my values and who I am are in or out of line. And so a big question everybody might be asking, there's two questions. One that I'm going to answer, and then I'm going to ask you, is everybody might be going, okay, what does this have to do with real estate? Everything. I'm going to answer the first question as the real estate person, everything, because in our business, I remember saying, I've become a great agent. I know the market. I know what to do. I know the people. I've sold, selling $50 million of real estate a year at this point. But there's so many difficult conversations. There's just kind of this weight that keeps coming back on me of, I know my intentions are good, but the outcomes, the struggle that's there and what the intention I'm bringing to the table is something's off. What is that? What is it about the conversations I'm having with my clients and the way I'm showing up that doesn't feel more empowering? It's just something's off. What is it about the way I'm asking questions? And so in that, I realized wait a minute. What understanding what is important to me, what I value as I bring it to the table, how I show up for the opportunity, and understanding the person on the other side of the table. They don't care. It's not about telling them they're wrong. It's not about telling them stats. It's not about telling them I'm the best. It's about showing up and knowing my values, and we'll talk about transformations, already knowing what I value. Quick comment. Well, what I value might actually be who I am, and what I believe, my self-concept, might just be my map, and it's off. Because let's go into that in a minute about the database and the summary, the database of beliefs and experiences, and then the summary representations. And that's kind of the key into doing the transformations, into aligning to who you are, to achieve those goals and those things that you want. Neuro-linguistic psychology also helps you alter, but going back into business, it's aligning to, what do I value? What do other people value? Getting real about that, in short. And when you do that, it catapulted my business into well in excess of 50 million in volume a year, and put me in the position, thanks to the work I've done with you, it put me in the position to transform my life into what I'd wanted to coach for years and couldn't figure out why I wasn't doing it. So that was question number one. What does that have to do with real estate? Everything. You can know.
If you want to take a temporary detour and talk about sales real quick, we can, because.
Well, give us that for a minute. Okay. Give us the question. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about sales and your experience there, because that also opened you up to NLP, right?
Absolutely. So whether you're a coach or a real estate agent or, an insurance agent, the number one thing for sales and persuasion, the number one thing to understand, the more you understand what your client wants, the better you're going to persuade them, the more you're going to sell. As a coach, the better you're going to be able to move that person to where they need to be, not necessarily what they want. Because I get people coming to me all the time for what they want. And then it's like, okay, it's just a matter of time before I'm going to give them what they need, and then they'll realize it. And I don't need to convince them of anything, because it's just there. And you can do the same thing in sales. So over and over, you've probably heard this 100 times or more. People don't buy based on logic. They buy based on feeling. And so they say, don't sell benefits and features first, sell them on the feeling, and then bring in the benefits and features, because then that's the logic that they'll use to convince themselves to finally sign on the dotted line. So that's partially true. I mean, it's mostly true. And it's not just like when we reduce humans down to just feelings, we kind of go, that doesn't feel right. Like, I want to feel like I have more than just like my emotions are being tickled, therefore I go in all those directions. It's not quite like that. Think of feelings as values, okay? And you already mentioned, and I say this a lot too, every one of your decisions, every one of your choices, every one of your behaviors is driven by a value that you're trying to fulfill. Now, whether or not you fulfill it will determine whether or not you will continue to do that behavior. And a lot of times, like bad habits, like let's say smoking or something like that, people say, well, how is that a positive intent, or how is that a value? That person is getting value out of that. Now, what we would need to find is there a way to get that value fulfilled and something healthier? And that's how you get somebody to quit smoking. Now, when it comes to sales, if you know that person's values, basically, what that person wants to feel. So if I know that, say, the reason you're looking for a house, and I'm able to elicit those values, and you can do this conversationally. I do it all the time. I did it with my wife when we were dating. I could talk about that as well. But if you elicit their values about what's in it for them to buy a house, what is important to them about that, and you will get to things like freedom, happiness, joy, all these things. And it's very important to know their words. Well, this is why they're buying a house. And if you can take what you're selling and it's a fit where you can package what you're selling in their values, you've got them. Like, that's it. Because that's what they want to feel. We want to feel this thing. So it's not just like an emotional feeling and this is why I buy. No, this is fulfilling your values. You buy something because you believe it's going to fulfill a value or a set of values. And a house is a big one. So there's probably a lot of very big values that someone's looking to fulfill when they're buying a house. You can find out what those are and you know exactly their words. All you need to do is package and show them how it lines up with what you're selling, lines up with what their values are, and the sale is done.
And really, and for real estate agents, it's more of we're selling ourselves because they've got to trust us first. And so when we identify what they value, being the person that aligns to that. Now, you can't fake it. Like, we could talk about that. But when, like, example, I remember in negotiating, we've had Chris Voss on the show, and he wrote the book, Never Split the Difference with Tall Rise. And that book talks a lot about asking questions. And so I learned the book and started applying it. And I was like, why does this work? And I even talked to Chris about it, and he said, well, it's actually the undercurrents of it are NLP.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, it aligns well. I read the book too, and it fits very well with NLP, but I didn't know that he knew that. He said a lot of it, he said, I'm not an NLP guy, but a lot of it comes from neuro-linguistic psychology or neuro-linguistic programming and how NLP works. I was like, once again. And so learning that and coming back, so when we work with people, understanding what they value helps us understand, well, what is it about the what and how questions, and when to get the that's right and when to get the no. Asking all of those questions it really comes back down to meeting people where they are, which I think you talk a lot about that in hypnosis and hypnotherapy, but meeting people where they are and then giving them the autonomy into leading and guiding them where they want to be, which is very relevant. Like in real estate, I think our biggest challenges are people trusting us, people hiring us and trusting us as their agent. And then having the understanding of that goes back into the selling of the property and understanding how to pitch and position properties, especially in luxury. It's a very kind of exclusive, elevated world but once you're in those circles and you understand the nuances and then how to actually align rather than fight them, but align and work with them in a way that serves the needs of everyone, it is truly unbelievable. People would say to me, I don't know what it is, but I don't need a presentation. I'm going to hire you. Nice. Very nice.
Right. And that really came from rather than trying to force things, hearing people, listening to their values and meeting them where they are for what they need.
Yeah. I mean, we've all experienced it where we kind of get suckered into some sort of presentation for something that we're not really interested in. Timeshares come to mind. And if like you can just throw stuff out there, but if the person's not really interested in it, then what is the point? And you're just hoping that there's a match, but you're really wasting your time. But if I sit with someone and I take the time to really understand what it is that they want, it's any situation that builds so much rapport. I mean, if somebody was showing you so much interest and trying to really understand what you want regarding something that you were considering buying, that feels great. That feels like, wow, this person is not just throwing a bunch of sales tactics at me. They're actually interested in what I want. And so, yeah, it's natural to trust someone who's asking good questions as long as you're not doing it like it's an interrogation and you're doing it, with using good communication skills. That is the most respectful thing you can do for your client. And it just builds tons of rapport and trust. And then it also serves the purpose of understanding what their values are so that you can then go and help them find what they're looking for. And that lines up with those values. And as soon as that person sees that, when you can show them that, they're going to buy. There's just no way around it. That's why they're looking to begin with. And you present them with exactly what they're looking for.
And that's the core. The core of everything is values and aligning those values into who we believe we are. And that aligns into, first of all, that creates the more positive feelings or self-esteem. And then the other part is the feedback we get from the world. We talk a lot about failure, right? And you talk a lot about failure. It's funny how when you know what your values are, you align your self-concept to that. The outcome is a positive self-esteem, and the feedback the world gives you is just feedback. Like it's more of, this is who I am. I want to align and assert what I value, not attached to an outcome.
Right.
And on that topic, in your life, you were in sales, and you weren't looking for NLP at first. Like, what led you down this path, and how did you see the power? Like, give us that whole story and that transformation in your life.
Sure. It seemed like NLP kept popping up around me as if it was kind of waving at me and telling me, hey, here's your purpose in life. And I kept ignoring it. The first major experience with NLP, other than I knew who Tony Robbins was when I was growing up. My dad was really into personal development. I actually got to meet Jim Rohn in person. I went to see him talk. My dad took me. I was like 16 years old. And so NLP I'd heard of it before. I didn't really know what it was. And then I was in college, and a friend of mine was raving about this professor who taught a course called The Philosophy of Psychology. And in it, he went into NLP, as well as hypnotherapy and Gestalt therapy. And I was like, I got to take this class. I was just fascinated. Even though I was in film school, it was like, I got to check this out. And I did. And this professor was extraordinary. And he would demonstrate everything that he would teach. And he would hypnotize people. Then he taught us how to hypnotize each other. Every time he wanted to do a demonstration, like for Gestalt therapy or anything, I'd raise my hand. I was so fascinated by this stuff. And at the end, he says, okay, what kind of ties this all together is NLP. And then he went into explaining NLP. And at the time, I didn't really feel like I still had a firm grasp of what it was. And so after college, around that time, 9/11 happened. I was out of college. I was out of school for the first time since I was like 3 years old. 9/11 happens. It was just a dark time in my life, and I fell into a depression, and I didn't have health insurance. I was a bartender at the time. I was living in New Orleans, is where I'm originally from. And so I reached out to him because I didn't have any money. And my professor, and I said, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm in a bad situation here. I don't have any money. But I do believe you can help me because I remember what you could do in class. And he said, yeah, come on in. So I came in, and he said, I don't believe in a free service, but I also don't need your money. Come back next week and donate some money to charity or do some community service. I don't care which, just, that's what you need to take care of. And I was like, okay, done. And I came back the next week. Within one session, after being depressed for about 6 months, maybe 9 months, the depression was gone. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, you hear that like depression takes a long time to come out of. We're talking a 1 hour session. And I walked out of his office, and I was just like, this can't be. This is just too weird. I was like, is this going to last? Is it going to wear off? I was like, okay, well, I'll see by next week, because I set an appointment with them to come back the following week. Came back the following week, and I was just like, I don't really have anything to talk about. I'm fine. And he goes, yeah, I think you are too. And that was it. And I did not experience depression for about another 10 years. And about another 10 years later, I was living here in Santa Cruz. And by the way, I didn't even know when I was moving here that Santa Cruz was where NLP was started, where
Wow.
how I found out is I was researching the market because I was opening an insurance agency here. And I saw that. I was like, wow, NLP was started here. And I was living in LA at the time. And I was thinking to myself, okay, when I get to Santa Cruz, there's going to probably be an NLP institute on every corner. And I'll eventually learn NLP at some point. Well, I get here and there's like no NLP. I couldn't find anybody. And it wasn't until one of my clients came in, I found out that he was actually one of the original developers and had worked with the founders and was here for that. And he didn't want to even answer that many questions about it. It's kind of weird. It's like a little secret around town. So anyway, I fall into a second depression. This time I go to traditional therapy. And I'm not knocking traditional therapy or a therapist. It really isn't the practitioner. But it took me a year to come out of that depression. So one session with my professor and an entire year with like a traditional psychotherapist. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to keep ending up back here if I don't do something different. I really need to do something different. And I've always liked physical fitness. And I thought, maybe your mental health is the same. You have to maintain it just like you would eat healthy food and work out. You don't do that once and think that you're healthy and then go eat junk food or whatever. You have to maintain it. And I thought, I think a great way to maintain this is to probably learn NLP. So I was thinking I'm going to learn NLP to make my business successful because it wasn't doing well. My marriage at the time, it was a previous marriage, that wasn't doing well either. I thought, maybe if I learn NLP, I can make these things better. I enrolled in a class. There was one class that would happen at the university where NLP was founded, that would happen every summer. And so I thought, I don't have the money. I can't spend the time out of my office. I'm just going to do it anyway, because I need to do something. I need to make something different. As soon as I stepped in that class, I felt like I had come home. Like it just all fit for me. Everything that they were teaching, I just couldn't get enough of it. I soaked it in, and people were there. Most of them were coaches and teachers, and they were saying, "So how long have you been coaching?" And I was like, "I'm not a coach." And they were like, "Well, do you teach NLP?" And I'm like, "No, I don't teach NLP." And I kept getting these questions, and I was just like, "No, I'm just an insurance agent. I just want to fix my business. I want to fix my marriage, and that's why I'm here." And I maintained that for an entire year until finally people were like, "You got to start coaching, Damon. Like, you're doing some good work in these classes. You're able to explain NLP concepts sometimes better than the teachers. You really should try this." And the only reason why I started coaching and teaching at first was because I wanted to get better at NLP. I wanted to learn it even deeper. And then once I started doing that and I actually started making money off it, I was like, wait a minute, why am I doing this insurance business that I have never enjoyed, has never been a good fit for me? Maybe this is what I should do. And that's how I got it. It was kind of an accident.
Wow. So it's kind of serendipity, kind of an accident, but it's almost like, it's like when you look at it backwards, it was like,
it feels like fate, when I explain it. I don't really believe in predestination or, fate like that, but it does. It felt like it's, and still to this day, it feels like there's just something that calls me back to it. There was even a time, and we could go into this, where my attempts to start a business, or I had the business, but keeping a sort of like a teacher business, in-person workshop kind of thing, it failed miserably. And so I quit. I quit YouTube. I quit everything. I thought I was going to have to start all over again with another business. And something just kind of pulled me back in. And then I ended up doing even better than I could have imagined. And the business had to change. I was trying to force it into something that it wasn't really what was going to work. And then what I did find was something even better. But it felt like anytime I start to like pull away from NLP or personal development and try to set my sights on something, it just kind of pulls me right back. And every time I'm happier for it. So there is something there that, yes, I feel like I am fulfilling my calling, my purpose when I teach, when I coach, and when I study this and do the work on myself, especially. That's all, it's all part of one thing.
So the first NLP, with that one session that got you out of that depression, because a lot of what you coach on is self-concept, and I think transformations and a lot of other cool stuff, Swish method, and there's an exercise you talk about on understanding there are just so many things in our subconscious that we're not aware of, that just in my work with you has just brought so many things to light that everyone listening, most of you are in luxury real estate as an agent, it is so completely relevant to understanding it's the small nuances in our business that make these huge transformations. But the question really first is what kind of, like, what was that? Was that a self-concept transformation, or was that something else, or how did he do it?
No, it was much simpler. Basically, it was a conflict integration, which we teach in our program as well. And that's all it was. And whenever he was doing it, when I was in the session, I remember very clearly, I had no idea what was happening, other than I had seen a similar exercise when he did a Gestalt demonstration before. And I trusted him enough that I was just like, okay, I'm just going to go along with what he's saying. And he basically pulled out chairs. And like we do a conflict integration, we have a very quick way of doing conflict integration. But what he does, he really took his time. He put out chairs, and he had me sit in the different chairs and basically talk to the different parts of myself to then bring it back together and integrate it. And that's really all it was. It was an integration. There was one part of me that felt like it was fighting the other part of me. And then
explain to everybody listening what conflict integration is, so that.
Yeah. So the best way that I can describe it is probably the experience that most people have, where they come to me they say things like, well, I sabotage myself, or I have all this resistance. I make a plan to go do something, like go for a jog or maybe a business goal or something like that. And something always stops me. Something always pulls me back. Now, some of that can be rooted in very deep beliefs, and that's where the self-concept model really comes in. But it could just be simple resistance. And so, I get people coming to me saying, can we destroy this part of me, this inner saboteur, and I get things like those. And I say, if I could, I would not. Because what that is, it's an unconscious part of you that got detached from the rest of you, meaning it's now unconscious. And you're consciously trying to go in this direction, but this unconscious part of you, by orders that you gave it, is trying to go in this other direction. And so you'd be like, well, why did I give it orders to go in this other direction? Because at the time that whatever this thing happened that created this resistance, at the time that happened, it probably seemed like a very good thing to do. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say you need to give presentations to people and you're afraid to do any type of public speaking. Well, if you trace that back, and here's just an example, it could be many things that happened, but what you might have found is that when you were, say, 10 years old, you had to give some sort of presentation in front of your class and everybody laughed at you. You said something wrong, everybody laughed at you, you felt really embarrassed. So in your mind, you said to yourself, don't ever let this happen again. Okay, so you gave the orders to this part of you, never let this happen again. The way that part of you thought about this, to strategize this, was don't ever get in front of people. Don't ever get in front of a group of people, because when you do that, now you run the risk of that happening again, that awful experience. So this part of you has a positive intention, but the way it's functioning is what we call an away from program. It's trying to move away from something it doesn't want rather than move towards something it does want. And so you give it the instructions. This falls into unconsciousness at, say, 10 years old. Now you're 30 years old, it's 20 years later. And in order to move your business ahead, you need to do these group presentations. And every time you go to do it, you freeze up and you think about all the things that can go wrong, and which is kind of like future pacing yourself to screw up, because that's what people do. They say, don't screw up, don't screw up. And they think of all the possible things that could go wrong. Well, you're just sort of creating a vision for everything to go wrong and for you to follow along with that. So anyway, that resistance needs to be brought back into consciousness and find out what was its positive intention, and then redirect that intention to integrate into who you are now and what you're doing now. And a great analogy for this is there were Japanese soldiers. The last Japanese soldier from World War II to finally surrender was 1974, when the war ended in the 1940s. And what happened was they were sent off to they were sent off to an island. These soldiers, they got disconnected from everything else, their commanders, whatever. They were given strict orders to never surrender and don't take your life. And so they hung out in the bushes for 30 years. And sometimes would fight with whatever military or police were there. And it wasn't until they brought their old commander, put that commander in uniform, sent that commander out into the woods and started calling out to that soldier, and then gave the soldier new orders. And that's usually the only way that they would surrender. And so you function very much the same way. You have given orders to yourself throughout your entire life. Most of the time, it's a reaction to something negative rather than saying, well, this is what I want, let me move toward that, which is a much more functional way of doing things. And that's how, we train people and coach people to focus on what they want rather than away from what they don't want. And so there's these little programs running inside of you that you started, and they might not be fit for what's happening now. Just like that soldier, he's fighting a war that doesn't exist anymore, but he doesn't know any better because that's what he was taught. And that was the last piece of information he got. So we have to update these programs to integrate into who you are now and the situations that you're in now.
That is just so powerful. So much of our culture and being human beings is, it's good to fight. Like if something bad, if I feel resistance, I need to just ignore that and just do it anyway. And in the meantime, I think the most powerful thing in that is no one does anything, nothing ever happens without good intention.
Yep. At its core.
At its core, right? Yes, it started with a good intention.
Right.
Like the path to hell is paved with good intentions, and the power in, as you say it, as like in this conflict integration, it's everybody. Like we talk about in coaching, it's amazing how if you ask somebody, what do you want? It's mind blowing that it's what I don't want. Well, I don't want. Instead of that, and that's the resistance component. We're resisting. Instead of that, what do you want? What do you want? Giving the resistance part of yourself. I'm quoting you. You said that part of yourself, okay, you don't want to be manipulated. You don't want whatever. Instead of that, what do you want? And there's something you've said recently, is you said, in what you don't want, identify the power in identifying what you do want and giving that part of yourself the job in helping get what you want, and permission for that quote unquote alarm to go off again and say, hey, wait, this isn't what I wanted. And the alarm is not the intention to start, not to shift back to avoidance, awareness to shift action to create the outcomes we're looking for.
Exactly. I'll give an even a personal example of that too. When I was doing insurance, I was trying so hard to be successful, and I was beating myself senseless. I was obsessed by it. I was working so long and so hard. My kids were very young at the time, and I wasn't spending a lot of good quality time with them, but I was determined, and I was using discipline, and I was using willpower, and I was fighting myself. And when I think back to that now, all I can see is that there was this deeper inner wisdom that just knew better, that if I did become successful at insurance, I would have golden handcuffs. I would be trapped. Imagine if I built this, huge business. I was very successful, but I was miserable. That was not going to change. I didn't enjoy it. Nothing against the insurance business.
Yeah.
I have one of my best friends is still an insurance agent. But for me, it was making me miserable. So now I would have been really successful financially, but still really miserable and not able to leave it. Because once you build something like that and you have so much success, it's really hard to walk away from it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I coach people on this all the time, because I have, like I said, these CEOs who are like making, 7 figures, and they're like, I'm miserable doing this, but they can't pull themselves away from it because they can't turn away from the success. So that inner resistance, I am so grateful for that during the time that I was doing insurance. And what it forced me to do was to realize that insurance wasn't it, and that I needed to look somewhere else. And so we often look at those things as like, well, no, it's just trying to stop me. It's sabotaging me. And like, no, there's some wisdom there. There's resources there that you're not accessing because you're cut off from them. And it gets even worse when you start to implement things like discipline, self-discipline and willpower. People are like, how can you be saying that you shouldn't be using discipline and willpower? When you use discipline and willpower, know right away that that's a clue that you're in a fight with yourself now. You're in a fight with yourself, when you can just find out, well, what is that thing that's resisting? Bring it into consciousness, integrate it. You'll feel more whole. You won't feel like your attention's divided anymore, because it won't be. And now you can focus fully on the thing that it is you want to create. Now, do you want to go at life willing and disciplining yourself, fighting yourself? And the times that you do achieve what you consciously want, it's going to feel somewhat good, but it's not going to feel fully fulfilled because part of you's not on board with it. Rather, go at this in a whole, complete, integrated way at everything that you want, so that when you accomplish it, it's fully fulfilling. Not just part of you is fulfilled by it. You're fully fulfilled by it. And that's also what motivation is. A lot of times for people, motivation is mysterious. Motivation is your values. When you're aligning to them, you don't have to think about motivation. You don't have to create motivation. It's built into you. When you're clear about what you want and there's no resistance to it, you're fully integrated and fully focused on it in a whole and complete way. You don't even have to think about motivation.
Well, what's interesting about what you said is 2 things. It's when you align to what you value, you show up for what you're best at and deliver on it, because we love what we're best at. What's interesting is, in some of it's we're being Americans, we have a Protestant heritage where, to serve God is to work. And I don't mean that as a negative or a positive comment, because it can be perceived as both, but there is a certain mentality that we just need to work hard. And if it's fun, that might not be hard enough. Now, I only say that to say there are 2 things that can come out of that sometimes. Is one is, no, you're going to love this one. You're just afraid of success. And the other one is, no, if you do that, you'll get lazy and you won't accomplish anything. And so let's talk about fear. You basically explained it, but as some people might have missed it, it's not fear of success. Let's just talk about fear of success for a minute.
That's another one of those things like affirmations, where a lot of your personal development gurus like to throw that out at people because it's a riddle you can't solve. It's a fake problem. And you'll see this in cult leaders even. I'm not calling all personal development gurus cult leaders, but there are some that are like that. But what a cult leader will do is they'll throw a riddle at someone, a problem that they've created. And when the person toils and tries to figure it out, and then they can't, and then they're frustrated by it, then the cult leader comes along with the answer to the riddle, which of course they have because they created it. So they created a fake problem that you couldn't solve. You got frustrated. Then they gave you the answer, put the fire out, so to speak. And then because you think that they gave you something, which they didn't, then you think, oh, this person must know something that I don't. So if somebody tells you, oh, well, you're not, where you want to be because you're afraid of success, that person will go into a tailspin trying to figure this out. How can I solve that problem? You can't, because if to solve the problem means you succeed at solving a problem, that can't happen because you believe and you're invested in this idea that you're afraid of that success. So you can't solve it. And all it does is you run around in circles, frustrated, until you finally go back to that guru. And that guru then says, yeah, well, give me $20,000. I'll help you solve this problem that I created for you. So another analogy that I like to use is if you were starving and I took a plate of your favorite food and put it in front of you, would you hesitate and then go, gee, I know I fear success, so I don't know if I can eat this food, because then I would be succeeding and satiating my hunger. It's absolutely absurd, right? We would never do that. We'd never say that. We would just eat the food without hesitation, without resistance, because why? We're very clear that we want it. We know we like this food and we're hungry. We have every reason to want it and no resistance holding me back. So you just do it. And that's in everyday life. If you have something that you want and you've cleared out all resistance to it, you don't have to worry about motivation. You're just going to do it. And not only that, you're going to succeed at it. And it's going to feel very natural. It's not like, you have to work yourself up and beat yourself up and discipline yourself and will yourself, and then finally you cross the finish line. No, you just do the things that you enjoy. And I like to use this other analogy. What creates conduction and electricity? Potential. Conduction moves because of potential. Metal has a lot of potential for conduction. That's why electricity moves through it. Motivation works the same way. Your values are that potential. There's always the potential for fulfillment of values, and that's what drives you. That's what motivates you. You have to be clear, though, about what those values are and what will fulfill those values first. A lot of people are not clear about that. You have to
give the potential a path to go on, exactly. Which means you've got to identify the resistance, give it a new job to open the path up so that the potential is achieved.
Right. So just to wrap that up, there is no such thing as fear of success. There's such thing as fear of change, fear of the unknown. And so somebody might attach an unwanted change to being successful. Like, oh, if I'm successful, then this other thing, like if I'm successful, then I'll have family members who will try to, borrow, try to get me to give them money. Okay. That's not fear of success. That's fear of something that might happen if you become successful. So we need to be very clear between what is success and what is these other things that you fear, because people will just lump them in together. And it's like, no, if you lump them in together, then yes, you will always, you're not going to go forward in success. Understand what you're afraid of, and then set that aside and work on that.
So 2 things I want to make a side comment. Everybody think about in our business, what most impacts our businesses as real estate agents is our understanding of these very things and the people we work with. Once we align to them within ourselves, it's powerful how we can then have such a much better understanding of meeting people where they are, where they're coming from, to help them show up for what they want, because buying a home is so personal. Now I'm losing my train of thought, but you were talking about, fears. So, there's aligning to what I value, identifying the good intention of the resistance, asking it the question, what's the good intention? Okay, we're avoiding this. What do we want instead? Going into creating that, and being aware of what we don't want in a way that's creating momentum, not avoiding. And then there's this other little thing hanging out over here. Well, if it does work, I'm afraid of this. How do you handle that?
It's just about getting clear about it. I mean, it's like if, let's say, in driving, you're I don't know, afraid to hit a dog. Well, if you know what a dog looks like and your eyes are open and you're focused on the road and you see one, and then your attention goes, oh, okay, watch for that. It might run out in front of the car, and you keep your eye on it and you just go, okay, we're all good. Past the dog, we're fine. That's all it is. As soon as you can identify what that fear is and then say, okay, well, how do I become successful and avoid this? Or can I be successful and just accept that this is a part of that kind of success? Sometimes there are just going to be things that we have to accept. There's usually, forget his name, said something like there's very few solutions and most things are trade-offs. Success is that way a lot of times, that yes, I want success. I want that more than what I have now. And so it's worth going for, but just know that there are some trade-offs. There are going to be some downsides to it. If I don't know what those are, then it kind of just all stays lumped inside my mind. And my mind's just saying, well, avoid it altogether. But no, once I can look at it all and say, well, no, here's the success part. Here's the downside to it. Either can I mitigate that, get rid of it completely, or can I just accept that? Am I willing to accept that as part of the success? Once you have the clarity around it, it's usually not a problem anymore. The things that keep us back or hold us back is oftentimes the things that are just unconscious, that are hanging out there that we haven't explored. And once we just bring them into the light, it's so much easier to deal with them.
You said in a recent on YouTube, you said, when like this, when there's resistance, this discipline, just ignore it. You said, there are things you might not think you want to know, but once you do, it's what's in our, it's if we can't identify what's in our if we can't identify the things holding us back are usually in our subconscious until we tap in. And it's interesting how when you ask, it's the power of just asking, and the answer that if you allow it is unreal, by the way, that I've learned through working with you. But also, if you leave it in the subconscious mind, that's when it has power. If you can bring it to light and see it, that's when you have the power to change it and work. And the same thing, it just how that applies to other people in negotiating transactions is just so ironic. How we negotiate with ourselves in a deal and seeing that in the other person is powerful. But anyway, get it out. When you bring it out of the subconscious and you can see it, then you can do something about it.
Yeah, my first really strong experiences with that in sales was selling life insurance. And I got very good at it towards the end of my career in insurance because I was learning NLP, and the reason why when I got into insurance, the life insurance was more interesting to me than like the car insurance and the home insurance, because I felt like that would be the best shot I had at making a real difference in someone's life. And not that they had to die for their families to experience that, but the security, because I had a young family at the time, and I just thought, just that security and knowing that, like, if something ever happened to me, my family's taken care of. Like, they'll be sad about losing me, but one thing they won't be is broke. And so, like, that was very comforting to me, and that's what I wanted to share with people. But the moment I talked about life insurance, people would scatter. They'd want to get out of my office really, really fast. And so what I had to do, and the reason why is because people just don't want to talk about death. And I think that's a shame. And that's another thing we could talk about, is that accepting your mortality is the most empowering thing there is. I mean, it is absolutely empowering. You will not be afraid to live if you're not afraid of death. Anyway, so I really had to learn how to bring about the life insurance conversation, really focused on giving that person fulfillment and safety and security for their family, rather than saying, okay, look, you're probably, everybody's going to die at some point. We don't know when it is. That was the usual conversation that we had. They taught us to start with. And it's like, whoa. Yeah. It's like, focus on what having this protection is going to fulfill for them, and go there. And then gently you can bring, it's going to have to come up the fact that we're talking about death. But anyway, that was a much better way to deal with it. But yeah, like that taught me a lot. Selling life insurance taught me a lot.